Although history tells us that the waterways of the United States were avenues for commerce and transportation, the Missouri River in the early 19th century was wild and by no means an easy river to navigate. The further one traveled from St. Louis towards Kansas City, the more difficult it became. Shifting sandbars, snags, narrow channels, poor weather, strong currents, and the depth of the river itself served as significant obstacles to early explorers and traders on the Missouri River. Travel by riverboat on the Missouri was slow and hazardous, and accidents were extremely common. Whereas keelboats and flatboats could only travel downstream with the river, steamboats could go both ways, greatly improving the potential for commerce and exploration. Additionally, steamboats had shallow draft hulls, allowing them to navigate in shallow waters and sandbars, and paddle wheels could be raised and lowered to adjust for the river's depth to avoid damage. Steamships were essentially the perfect vessel to navigate the Missouri River with, and the first to travel it was the Independence, a paddle wheel that traveled out of St. Louis on July 23, 1819. It traveled to Franklin, Missouri, and then back to St. Louis over a 2-week-long voyage that heralded the coming age of steamboat traffic on the Missouri for the next century. The Independence was followed up by an exploratory group organized by the federal government, comprising the steamships Western Engineer, Thomas Jefferson, and the R.M. Johnson. The three ships, led by Major Stephen H. Long and Colonel Henry Atkinson, were sent to explore and map the region, and by 1829 there was a regular packet of steamships running from Kansas City to St. Louis, and by 1839 at least 10. A packet steamboat was a small and nimble craft that operated on a tightly scheduled route to transport passengers and mail down the river. Many packets and trade ships traveled routes on the Missouri during the 1830s and 1840s, trading and transporting goods to and from Washington and various other river cities and towns, most notably St. Louis, Jefferson City, and Kansas City. The rise of these packet steamboats on the river suddenly opened up a large region of Missouri to rapid development by American settlers and immigrants, most notably the Germans. They were partially spurred to action by Gottfried Duden, a Prussian lawyer who visited Missouri in 1824. He wrote a book called A Report on a Journey to the Western States of North America, which spoke in detail about Missouri's immense area, mild climate, low taxes, and security. In a way, Missouri was also similar to the Rhineland due to the large amounts of fertile land on the Missouri River, which was ideal for agriculture and the production of wine. Steamboats were essential in transporting migrants and immigrants through the state to build new settlements. They established what would later be called the Missouri Rhineland, as described by the St. Louis Post-Dispatch in 1893. A veritable Rhineland, with its vineyards, wine presses, its castles, and its legends. By the mid-1850s, Washington, Missouri was a substantial producer of wine, most of the businesses being owned by German immigrants like the Helferberger, Rieger, and Jung families. Washington's position on the Missouri River allowed it to fully utilize a booming steamboat industry to export wine and other agricultural products down and upriver well into the 19th century. For most of the 19th century, the waterways of the Missouri were one of the only ways to transport a substantial amount of goods to and from cities in the state, and out of the state as well. Steamboats brought nearly all the needed supplies to Washington and similar communities along the river. Steamboats were also the only source of news, mail, and long-distance communication, and when one arrived in town, there was almost always excitement. The river city's dependence and interest on steamboats inspired new captains and pilots to try the river themselves, specifically Captain Archibald S. Bryan, who commanded a large number of packet ships on the river, such as the Helena, which can be seen here sending Sioux Indians to the Standing Rock Agency after the Sioux War, the Hattie Mae, the Bright Star, Calypso, and the stern-wheel steamboat General Meade. Missouri River packet ships were specially adapted and called mountain ships, mostly medium-sized and utilizing stern wheels so that they could survive longer on the Missouri River, which was still harsh during this time period. Another famous captain who operated out of Washington during this time was Edward M. Baldwin, who piloted the steamboat Cora and the snagboat C.R. Suter, which was tasked with removing snags. Snags were semi-submerged or even wholly submerged messes of trees and debris that could damage and even sink entire steamships. Snag ships like the C.R. Suter removed them from the river to make travel safer for other boats. Edward Baldwin was widely regarded as one of the finest captains on the Missouri and worked on 7 different ships during his time on the river. When the Pacific Railroad finally did reach the town, the need for steamships dropped, as goods could now be reliably transported on land. This caused a decline in the area's reliance on steamboats, but it was periodically revived by gold rushes in California and in Montana, which once again spurred travelers to move west using the Missouri River as their highway. The The golden age of steamboats, although hindered by the construction of the railroads, expanded into the niche of entertainment. Steamboats began to be constructed as showboats, moving theaters on water, notably the steamboat Wonderland and Goldenrod, where tickets could be paid to watch shows and live performances. Passengers from Washington could now go on sightseeing tours, dinner cruises, gamble, dance, and listen to music depending on what steamship they bought tickets for. One of the most famous that operated in Washington was the May Bryan, a ferry boat with 2 decks and a small pilot's house. The May Bryan was frequently used for short trips and getaways by people in Washington, and also rescued people from floods in the Warren County bottoms. The May Bryan can be seen here, trying to help the steamship New Haven, which sunk just a little ways east of Washington, likely due to a snag. Despite the advantages of steamboats, snags, ice, and the regular difficulties of the river sank many boats well into the end of the 19th century, and even the early 20th. As the country began to more rapidly develop rail and land infrastructure in the late 1800s, steamships were phased out by more efficient competition. The Northern Pacific Railroad reached Bismarck in 1872, providing a safer form of travel for settlers into the Northwest, without the unpredictability and dangers of riverboating. The Missouri, Kansas, and Texas Railroad was eventually built through the Warren County bottoms, and the May Bryan, like many other steamboats, was essentially put out of business. It ultimately sank in 1898. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers also did considerable work on the Missouri River during and after the 1930s, dredging, deepening, and narrowing the river. This made the Missouri more hospitable to other forms of riverboats, and steamboats were traded off for more efficient forms of transportation, like fossil fuel-powered barges. Since the late 1800s, Washington and other cities like St. Louis saw a slow decline in the travel of steamboats off their shores, and they moved to exporting and importing by rail, a change that was fought, but proved to be inevitable. The writing on the wall was clear. The age of steamboats had come to an end.